if you want a sign that humanity's still got it going on.
The people are revolting.
Welcome to People Are Revolting, a daily dose of disobedience. Here are more stories from the Women's March. This piece is written by Lilia Calampenso, published at goupstate.com. More than 300 people gathered in the heart of downtown Greenville Saturday to advocate for reproductive rights, to protest legislation aimed at restricting access to abortion. The event at One Plaza Saturday was one of nearly 600 similar marches across the country that were organized by a coalition of women's rights and advocacy groups and the Women's March Network, which organized the January 2017 Women's March following the election of Donald Trump as president. Organizers said the march Saturday was a response to recently passed legislation in Texas that effectively bans abortions after 6 weeks and does not make concessions for pregnancies resulting from rape, sexual abuse, or incest. The so-called Heartbeat Bill also allows a state to award $10,000 to anyone who successfully sues an individual who has helped a woman receive an abortion after 6 weeks. Equally restrictive legislation has been introduced in other states, including South Carolina. The marches were organized in advance of a Supreme Court session Monday that would hear a Mississippi case that would challenge Roe v. Wade, the case that made abortion legal in the United States. We want to show there are people that are working towards change, and at the same time, we stand with the women that may not have had the same rights and accessibilities as us anymore, Greenville March co-organizer Carrie Counton said. We are not okay with that, and we're showing that. The Greenville March was also a call to action for human rights. The large roster of speakers, which ranged from medical and legal experts to domestic violence advocates and local and state legislators, addressed everything from immigration to domestic violence and LGBTQ rights. All urged those in attendance to vote. Municipal elections are coming up on November 2. We have to do something, Greenville City Councilwoman Lillian Brock Fleming told the crowd. I don't want you to leave here without realizing all this is slavery, Brock Fleming said. This is slavery when a man can tell you what you can do with your body, when you have sex, what kind of baby you can have, or when you can have that baby. You better get mad as hell. It's time to fight back. The rally took place during busy Saturday in downtown Greenville, with the TD Saturday Market, Oktoberfest, and Project Host Barbecue Cook-Off all taking place within a mile radius, but encountered no real opposition. There were no counter-protesters, save for a few people who shouted their disagreement as they passed by. The crowd spanned multiple generations, with parents attending with their children and grandmothers holding signs imploring, "Never again." While many in the crowd likely never lived during a time before abortion was legal, Elaine Huff Lowe remembered that time well. When women died or suffered permanent injury from illegal back alley abortions, she said. She felt exasperated, she said, to still be fighting for safe, legal abortions. We fought long and hard for people to be able to have legal, safe abortions. And now it seems like we're going backward, and that frightens me for my children, my grandchildren, and their children, Huff Lowe said. You cannot give up for those that come behind you. Next is a piece published at losangeles.cbslocal.com. Thousands of people took to the streets in downtown Los Angeles and other locations around the Southland Saturday to support reproductive rights as part of a nationwide series of demonstrations against Texas's near-total abortion ban. We have fought before, we will do it again to get what we need, Sophia Campbell, who showed up for Saturday's march, said. About 20,000 people were expected to take part in the Women's March in Los Angeles, which began at 10 a.m. at Pershing Square and led to City Hall, where Representative Karen Bass, Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors Chair Hilda Solis, and Supervisor Holly Mitchell were set to speak, along with actresses Alyssa Milano, Patricia and Rosanna Arquette, Maria Shriver, Raven Simone, and Christine Lottie. Paxton Smith, the Texas student whose valedictorian speech went viral for speaking in opposition to Texas abortion law, also appeared with feminist attorney Gloria Allred. Lawmakers in Texas do not get to decide what a woman's decision is. It's not theirs, it's not the church's, it's not any lawmaker, it's hers, Shriver, a news anchor and activist, said. It works because we did this for gay rights and I can get married, so we just have to keep on pushing forward, Raven Simone, an actress and activist, said. No, this is not about abortion, actress and activist Christine Lottie said. If it was, then Texas and other like-minded anti-choice states would be advocating for accessible birth control, sex education, health care for all, and equitable parental leave. Similar gatherings were scheduled in other parts of the Southland, including Long Beach, West Hollywood, and Pasadena, Irvine, and Fountain Valley. The Women's March Foundation was holding its official march in Washington, D.C. with more than 600 sister marches planned nationally. The event will be the 5th Women's March, with this year focusing on abortion rights, following a Texas ban on abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy, when many women aren't aware they're pregnant. Sydney Troutwine, a marcher who spent most of her life in Texas but recently moved to LA, said she was pissed when asked how she feels about the new law in her home state. I have friends that won't be able to, leave the state if they need help, and it's just devastating, she said. Next up, a piece from the Statesman.com. It's just Statesman.com, not thestatesman.com. And this is written by Natalia E. Contreras. Vienna, age 12, got up on a stool to reach the microphone. She spoke to a crowd of thousands of women, men, and children Saturday who gathered on the Capitol's South Lawn to protest Senate Bill 8, a Texas law that bans many abortions. Quote, most people don't think about kids like me when they think about pregnancy. But the fact is, kids as early as 10 years old can get pregnant, she said. This issue isn't just relevant to adults. I want to live in a world where girls aren't raped. I want to live in a world where I don't have to be marching for my constitutional rights. The rally was organized by Women's March ATX, a group that advocates women's reproductive rights, LGBTQIA rights, and workers' rights. Hundreds of Women's March protests Saturday were planned across all 50 states and in Washington, D.C. Several thousand were in attendance in Austin, according to Department of Public Safety officials. Vienna, whose parents declined to give her last name, is the leader of Austin's Youth Committee of the National Organization for Women. She was among dozens of speakers that included several other Austin middle and high school students, Texas lawmakers, activists, and advocates for marginalized groups. About 30 counter-protesters were also at the rally, separated from the main event by a line of Texas Department of Public Safety officers. The anti-abortion advocates held signs that read, I am the pro-life generation. Lawmakers who spoke at the rally Saturday included U.S. Representative Lloyd Doggett, State Senator Sarah Eckhart, and Travis County Commissioner Bridget Shea and Ann Howard. Former State Senator Wendy Davis also spoke at the event. Many speakers focused on the importance of protecting the rights of younger generations and how SB 8 can disproportionately affect low-income populations and women of color. Pamela Bryant, founder of Walk by Faith Prison Ministry, joined the rally Saturday in solidarity. Bryant said the group has recently been walking the streets and helping the homeless population in Austin. The abortion law's impact on homeless women was top of mind for her, Bryant said. I don't think lawmakers understand each individual situation. They're not seeing it from how it can impact other people, Bryant said. It's just not right for them to make decisions for everyone, and especially for people of color, for the whole world. On Friday, U.S. District Judge Robert Pittman heard arguments from lawyers from the U.S. Justice Department and the Texas Attorney General's office as Pittman considers a request from the federal government to block enforcement of the state law. Philip King and Amanda Barzik took their 4-year-old niece, Maya, with them to Saturday's rally. They helped Maya make signs that read "Girl Power" and "We Are Strong." We want to teach her from a young age that it's important to fight for what you believe in, and that when unjust laws are passed, we need to fight to let lawmakers into power who reflect our values, King said. Even though I don't have a uterus, I love so many women who would be affected by this law. It goes beyond abortion. This really affects everyone, and especially marginalized women. FayObserver.com published this piece by Jack Bowden. About 100 people marched from Cross Creek Park to the Cumberland County Courthouse in downtown Fayetteville on Saturday afternoon during the Fayetteville Women's March. The march, sanctioned by the National Women's March Organization, is part of a national movement involving many similar events across the country after Texas passed new anti-abortion legislation earlier this year, event co-organizer Catherine Entrocaso said Friday. There are marches all across the country occurring at the same time. There's a national one in D.C., and that's run by the National Women's March Organization. But every state and every major city has a women's march occurring at the same time, Entrocaso said. Entrocaso and fellow organizer Sasha Russell came together to organize the march to join in rallying cries across the country for women to enact change within their communities, specifically in regard to reproductive rights in this case, Entrocaso said. While Saturday's march specifically focused on reproductive rights in the wake of Texas's new legislation, Entrocaso said it's important to remember that the Women's March movement is about far more than just abortion. Women's March events tend to be publicized as pro-abortion or supportive of reproductive rights solely, Entrocaso said. Their mission is to harness the political power of diverse women in their communities to create entry points for change. Other issues supported by Women's March events around the country are environmental justice, immigrant rights, disability rights, civil rights, and workplace rights, she said. Participants of Saturday's march met at Cross Creek Park around noon and heard several speakers talk about the importance of reproductive rights before marching through downtown Fayetteville, past Segra Stadium, the police station, and City Hall, to the Cumberland County Courthouse, where several participants shared personal anecdotes of what drew them to the march. One of the speakers before the march was the president of Fayetteville's chapter of the National Organization of Women, Pam Carver. Women have been fighting for their rights, well, forever, Carver said. Women fought for and won the right to vote. Women continue fighting for the inclusion in the Constitution. Today we are here continuing the fight for the rights given to women 48 years ago in the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. Carver and other activists argue that the new legislation in Texas effectively overturns Roe v. Wade, a U.S. Supreme Court decision protecting women's rights to choose to have an abortion without government restriction. Other speakers, like Kelsey DeMayo, drew attention to the issue of women who don't want an abortion, but for whom reproductive rights can provide adequate and sometimes life-saving health care. Before the march, DeMayo shared the story of her friend, writer Erica Fazio, who lost her child before he was born and needed to abort his body before it caused her serious medical problems. Fazio was unable to get this life-saving medical treatment because of anti-abortion legislation, and thus was forced to keep the lifeless body of her son in her womb. She was chastised by anti-abortion activists for wanting to get the treatment necessary to save her own life, DeMayo said. Quote, "My son's corpse had more say over my body than I did," DeMayo quoted from an article written by Fazio. Other participants shared similar stories of their personal grief caused by anti-abortion legislation, and some expressed their gratitude that North Carolina is still a state where adequate reproductive health care is still an option. Also in attendance at the event was Democratic North Carolina State Senator Kirk DeVere, who represents Cumberland County. He addressed the crowd before the march and emphasized the need for legislators to fight for women's rights and reproductive rights alike. We don't want to be Texas, DeVere said. We've got a government that believes in women's rights, and we've got a state legislature that's in the minority that can stop bad legislation from happening. It's so important that if we care about women's rights, if we care about equal rights, if we care about all the things that we're passionate about, we have to get out and do things like this. After the march, Entricasso and Russell said they felt like they had accomplished what they set out to do, and echoed voices from across the country advocating for reproductive rights. It's almost indescribable, Entricasso said. There's power in numbers. There's power in visibility. As the march passed through downtown Fayetteville on Saturday afternoon, their chants could be heard by many people outside restaurants and businesses on Hay Street, many of whom applauded and chanted along with the participants. Women united, Entricasso called to the crowd. Cannot be defeated, the crowd called back. Dispatch.com published this piece by Yilun Cheng. More than 1,000 demonstrators gathered in front of the Ohio State House Saturday to protest Texas's restrictive abortion law and demand reproductive rights for all women, holding signs that read, "Stop the war on women," "Not your body, not your decision," and "It's time to ovary act." That's brilliant. Protesters stood in the midday heat, cheering for speakers who decried anti-abortion bills across the country and asked Ohio lawmakers to better protect women and other marginalized communities. Organizers put large pieces of paper below the State House steps for people to write down their demands for Ohio legislators during the noon event. Besides affordable and accessible abortion services, participants also requested things like better health care policies and an end to partisan gerrymandering. After the initial rally, demonstrators marched along South High Street, East Main Street, and South 4th Street before returning to the State House for a voter registration drive and more speakers. The Rally for Abortion Justice in downtown Columbus was part of the 2021 Women's March. The main rally was held Saturday at Freedom Plaza in Washington, D.C. More than 600 marches took place in cities throughout the United States, CNN reported. While organizations such as Planned Parenthood sent speakers to support the Columbus rally, it was a group of volunteer activists who put the event together. Jess Stein, a 32-year-old student at Columbus State Community College, said that when she found out that there was no local march planned, she reached out to the Women's March to host the Columbus rally, along with a few other women activists. When I found out about the Texas law, I was scared and angry, because I think of all the women who have hopes and dreams that will be crushed by this ban, Stein told the Dispatch. They forget that pro-choice also means the right to choose to become a mother. And what infuriates me is if you can't trust us to choose, how can you trust us to be parents? Last month, the most restrictive abortion law in the country to date went into effect in Texas. It banned abortions after a cardiac activity is detected, which usually happens after 6 weeks, before some even know that they are pregnant. There are no exceptions for survivors of incest and rape. Protesters said they fear that other states might follow suit. I want to make a presence at the State House to show that the community doesn't want a copying of the Texas law here in Ohio, said Emily Smith, a 27-year-old law student who drove from Dayton to attend the rally. It's already too difficult for women to access abortion. We can't put more burden on women who could really use that access. Morgan Harper, a Columbus native and Democrat running for the U.S. Senate, was one of the speakers. She said advocating for a woman's right to choose has always been at the forefront for her. All of us are part of an ongoing fight for equal rights, but these rights are under attack, Harper said. Backward decisions are making a mockery of our democracy. These decisions will impact black people, people of color, the working class, more than anyone. Kathy DeVoe of Grove City brought her daughters 3 and 5 to the rally, which also included a small number of counter-demonstrators carrying signs. She said she wanted her kids to hear about the issue from an early age. We experience violence a lot when we're women, and we're scared to speak up, she said. So I think having them see from a young age that it's okay to speak up and fight for what you believe in is good for them. If you want to check out back episodes of People Are Revolting, just go to peoplearerevolting.com. You can also follow on Twitter at People Revolting. Keep revolting, and thanks for listening.
If you want a sign that humanity's still got it going on,
The people are revolting.
I think you just nailed it.